Come on, girl, don't do this to me. You can make it. We just need to get over that hill. Surely there will be a spring there. Just one hoof in front of the other. Mithrandir, can you help her?
Not in any way that would matter, Lady Ariun. Mordor is no place for horses. It is no place for anyone, really, not since the Dark Lord made it his realm. Your steeds have done well to carry us this far, my lady, but I am afraid there is only one thing we can do to help them now. They can help us one last time.
I understand. I'm sorry, girl. You did well. You won't be so thirsty soon, I promise you. Nugai, you know what to do. Make sure you cut as much out as you can. I doubt we will find any source of food to forage here, and I'd rather not eat whatever we find on these orcs. Though, if this goes on, we may have no other choice. I was in Harad once, and I thought that place was inhospitable. I thought our steppes were too much for weaker peoples. But how can anything live here? It's just dust and ash and this relentless heat. At least in Rhûn there were swamps and enough plants to graze our horses, but here, how can Mordor even feed its own orcs in such a wasteland?
You saw these great farms around the Sea of Rhûn yourself, my lady. That's how. Countless orcs and captured slaves work there to feed armies of the Eye, and unlike with the realms of men, they don't need to feed anyone else. Every creature between us and Rhûn is a soldier of the Dark Tower. That is why Barad-dûr is so concerned with your father switching sides. The most important part of Mordor is now exposed to an invasion, and the Eye knows well that if it loses Rhûn, its armies will surely starve to death in the coming months, and when orcs start to starve, they will turn on each other. You have seen yourself all the hordes that were sent to stop your father's invasion. The Dark Lord knows his fate will not be decided in the west, but here in the east.
But can we really win such a war, Mithrandir? You saw yourself those endless columns of orcs marching east, and you heard rumors of the Empire descending from the north. I know my father gathered thousands of warriors, and the dwarves provided their own reinforcements, but even with all they have, they will be outnumbered 10 to 1 at best. They may have bought us time to reach Rhûn, but I don't think there's any hope for my people after that.
There was never much hope, my lady. Only fool's hope. But that is precisely why we must press on, no matter the hardships. The only way we can save your father and your people is to finish what we started. The ring must be destroyed. And speaking of it, how do you feel, my lady? I have no doubt it will try to warm your way into your mind the closer we get to the place of its creation.
It's getting heavier. I feel like it's weighing me down more than my blade, bow and arrows combined. But I persevere, Mithrandir. How many riders rode off to the west under Mordor's banners for this endless war? How many camps were emptied for Barad-dûr's ambitions? If my people can finally live free under open sky, then even if this damned piece of jewelry drags me down to my knees, I will crawl all the way to the mountain if I have to. I will not be broken by a thing.
You truly are as brave as Alatar said, Lady Ariun. I could think of no better person to carry the ring, but pay heed that it won't corrupt your bravery and determination. We still have a long way ahead of us, and the hardships we'll face will only get worse. It will try to convince you to use it for the benefit of our mission, or for the sake of our own companions. Do not listen to it. Even if we were all to be dying around you, you must never use it.
It will not come to this. Now, be silent. What do you see, Nugai? Ah, there is a rider approaching us. I hope he didn't spot your pointy hat, Mithrandir. Everyone, take cover and ready your bows. We'll shoot him as soon as he crests that hill.
Hold a moment, my lady. I don't sense any malice from this man. He's approaching us alone, here in Mordor. I don't think he's hostile, and even if he is, he's clearly not a threat to our company.
I'm not taking any chances. Ready, arrows? Wait, I know this man. I'd recognize that smug bastard anywhere. Hold your fire, men. I'll be damned, Mithrandir, maybe you were right. Leave this to me, but keep your bows trained on him. Salavumbar. It seems that we once again meet in most unlikely circumstances.
Lady Arion, so my hunch was right. When I heard rumors from my old friends in your father's court about some mysterious expedition to Mordor, I thought there would only be one woman brave enough to lead it. As soon as I heard about it, I left my post in the Empire and I've been tracking you ever since. It must be providence or miracle that I managed to find you all the way here.
Or you were led to us. I forgot you joined Rhûn, Sal. You know that makes us enemies now. Are you here to stop us?
By myself? I know I'm not the brightest Southron around, but please give me some credit. You have a wizard with you, for sans sake. He could probably rip my soul off from my body with a flick of a finger. No, Lady Arion, I am here to help you, like you helped me back when I was locked up by your father. Sal of Umbar never forgets his debts. Do they really think I can do that?
Sweet words, Sal, but you are known for them. How can we trust you after you fought on the side of our enemies for years now?
We were not enemies before your father switched sides, and besides, I'm not much of a loyal servant to any lord or banner, as you well know. And even if someone looks for me, the Empire gave me an armor with a mask. You remember my second Hakim. He can keep appearances in my stead. But if you want more proof, then fine. Take my spear and my horse. I see that you had to get rid of yours, but mine was born in the deserts of Kharak. It can survive here much better than your steeds. Have your wizard cast a spell on me to make me tell the truth. I care not what you're doing here, Arion, but you saved me once, so the least I can do is make sure you get home in one piece.
Very well, I'll take the horse, but keep your spear. I have a feeling we'll have a need of every pair of hands we can get here. But know that I will have my eye on you, Sal of Umbar.
As long as you have one on the horizon as well. Speaking of that, if you continue walking down this valley, then you will find a pack of orcs behind the next hill. I'd suggest turning north, into those rocks that will cover our passing. Now come, there is no time to waste. Any moment we linger, the orcs may spot us, and when they do, we'll have the entire Mordor on our heads. And I doubt even I could talk my way out of an Uruk horde. So hurry on. You can tell me more about your mission once we are out of the open. Or not, you can lower your bows, fine, I won't ask again. But I wonder if that other rumor I heard has any truth to it.
Let us settle matters on the field of battle.
Soldiers of Kingdom of Dale stood solemnly in the falling snow, watching brass-clad Imperial army appear from the haze. Their king has made a choice to refuse the offer of peace, to stop the Easterlings from taking one more step towards Dale and Erebor. Now it was up to his men to make this declaration reality. They stood silently on a snowy field, watching as their Easterling foes emerged from the haze, and upon the faces of soldiers of Dale, determination mixed with anxiety. They have heard many a rumor about the Empire. They heard how this realm, broken mere years ago by civil war, rose up like a phoenix from its own ashes, and since then marched across the plains of Rovanion, trampling everything in its path. They heard of heroic defences mounted by dwarves of Erebor and men of Dorwinion, and heard how they all, one by one, collapsed and did nothing to stop Rhunic advance. And as the warriors clad in dragon-scale armor emerged from the falling snow, all those rumors made men of Dale shiver. For although they stood here, on this field, ready to defend their lands, most of them were no warriors. The army of the Lake Kingdom was made up mostly of levies, conscripts and watchmen, soldiers used more to protecting roads or bridges, and not fighting in open field battles. There were some professional troops among them, mostly Athalan rangers, who trained their skill in endless encounters against monsters of Mirkwood, but they were only a small fraction of the army. Fortunately, the allies of King Bain did rally to his cause, and both elves and dwarves marched alongside longbowmen of Dale, ready to face their dreaded foes together. But the one thing that kept everyone confident, despite seemingly bleak odds, was the presence of General Vidusith, a man who was truly one of the people he led into combat. Once, he was a mere guardsman in Esgaroth, defending the lake town from many threats that emerged from the woods in the west, but his skill as a warrior and as a leader saw him rising like a star to the top, and the king himself recognized his ability and made him commander of an entire army. Since then, the Watchman General, as his troops called him, fought on all fronts around Dale. He pushed back orcs of Mirkwood and Gundabad back into the wretched woods and mountains. He brought order to lawless plains of Ruvanion and broke many raiders who dared to try and attack his home. He even fought incursions from Mordor itself, and every time he was victorious, and he and his pikemen were renowned as an unbreakable anchor upon which the entire army could build itself around and break any foes that would dare to come to them. Except, men of Rhûn were not going to come to them. Uldor and Kabisa marched their men through the night, for their scouts informed them about a hill nearby, a hill that could be used to rain down fire on Dalian positions. Longbowmen of Bard the Bowman could outrange Runic archers without issue, but they could not outrange Easterling siege engines. The ballistae were set up on a hill, and soon first bolts sailed through the air, tearing holes in Northmen ranks. Vidusith had artillery of his own, but he quickly realized using it would not be an easy task. Easterling cavalry rode out from the fog and surrounded Dalian formations. That was one weakness of the Northern Army, complete lack of horsemen, which meant the Easterlings could use their mobility to pick whatever engagements they wished, and all Vidusith could do was to respond. Soon, arrows from Baroon horse archers fell upon his artillerymen, and all he could do was to order his own bowmen to return fire. But as soon as they did, the nomads simply rode away, laughing and jeering as arrows fell harmlessly to the ground behind them. Realizing he was forced to make a move, Northman General gave his men an order to advance, and his entire formation marched up the hill and soon had to face a rain of burning arrows. The longbowmen would decimate Runic archers in an open field, but with Easterlings shooting from the safety of a hill, the advantage of range was neutered, and soon dozens of lightly armored Northmen fell as they waded through deep snow towards their foes. Those who got close were met by a hail of crossbow bolts fired by Dorwinian goldvines, and even elven rangers of Mirkwood could do little to defend themselves from their heavy, still missiles as they pierced their shields, armors and bodies, and laid low entire rows of warriors. The Northmen replied with their own barrage, but they could barely see their targets up on the hill, and the return fire wasn't as deadly as it would have been on a flat plain. To make matters worse, deep snow and constant arrow and artillery fire broke Dalian formation, and the men who rushed up the hill quickly became a disorganized, chaotic mass, something that Runic cavalry was waiting for. From both flanks, Eastern horsemen charged through the snow, crashing into their distracted enemies. They targeted archers specifically, and the longbowmen, though deadly at range, could not stand against nomadic lancers galloping through their formation. The rangers fared better. Upon seeing the approaching cloud of snow that signaled incoming charge, they dropped their bows and readied their blades, only to gasp in astonishment upon seeing their foes. The company that rode from the haze was not made up of Runic riders, but cavalrymen of Dale. Their blue armor was emblazoned with Golden Dragon of Rhûn, as if in mockery of their colours. The rangers stared at this, wide-eyed, unsure what to do, but General Vidusith took the initiative. "Death to traitors!" he shouted, and began waddling through the snow to join the battle himself. The rangers rallied and closed ranks, but their treacherous brothers charged into them anyway, just to ride away moments later, leaving dozens of dead behind. Vidusith stared at their backs with fury in his eyes. He had reports of scout companies disappearing on the plains, but he expected they fell in battle, not joined their hated foes. The wealth and power of the Golden Emperor were truly spectacular, for even from his throne on the other side of the Sea of Rhûn, he could sway seemingly loyal soldiers to his cause with ease. Still, The only way now was forward, and Vidusith joined his men in their climb towards the hill, walking through the snow and corpses of his fallen brothers, and joined the fight personally. He still had numbers on his side, and Rhûnic army, while intimidating to face, had only few hundreds of actual infantrymen ready to form the battle line. If men of Dale could break through them, the rest of the archers and horsemen would have to scatter, but it was easier said than done. When the rivermen finally reached their foes, they were met with an unbreakable wall of Haradrim pikes. On both their flanks, Arulad warriors, Locarim and mercenaries charged down the hill towards approaching Northmen, who, already exhausted from a long climb, offered only a token resistance. Arrows kept falling around, cavalry rampaged across back lines, taking out archer companies one by one. Elves, who were the first to reach the top of the hill, were decimated by arrows and crossbow bolts, and then finished off by heavily armed mercenaries. Vidusith's own pikemen did what they did best. They marched right where the battle was fiercest, and slowly but surely pushed their enemies back, but all around them, the rest of the Northmen were either dying or fleeing. The sight of their own brothers charging into their flanks demoralized them completely, and soon the Watchman General found himself alone, surrounded from all sides. When he tried to break away, he was met with crossbow fire. When he tried to push through, he found it impossible to remove the mass of men in front of his company. The smell of burnt flesh and screams of wounded men could push even the bravest of men beyond the brink, and yet still Vidusith pressed on, as he and his men impaled dozens of Locarim and mercenaries in front of them. Finally, the general could see the sky between his foes, but then his world became red as a crossbow bolt buried itself deep in his back. His plate armor has finally gave in, and Vidusith the Watchman fell to his knees as halberds of Locarim hacked him apart. Only a singular Northman limped his way back to Dale, where he brought news of this terrifying defeat to his king. Over 3,000 soldiers perished in battle, while the rest have been captured and burned alive as a warning to others. The Empire of Rhûn has offered Dale peace, and that offer was refused. Now the kingdom of Bard the Bowman would pay the price for this defiance, and soon brass-clad armies would march into their lands and punish their arrogance. The news of Dalian defeat spread far and wide like wildfire. In the Empire itself, heralds sang paeans praising Uldor and Kabisar's victory. "Behold," they said, "another realm dared to raise its hand against the glorious Golden Empire, and was promptly put in its place." The masses cheered, recruitment camps swelled with volunteers, but back in the north and west, the message, spread by fleeing refugees and Imperial agents alike, was slightly different. The Emperor offered peace, the agents whispered to anyone who would listen. Why fight the Golden Empire, when it proved time and time again that it couldn't be stopped? While fight for dwarfs who would rather lock themselves away in their mountain holds rather than provide help to their human allies? Why fight for elves who would put an arrow in you for daring to set a single foot in one of their glades? Why die for realms ruled by kings who cared only for their noble cronies and paid no heed to the plight of common man? Why not, instead, follow the example of the Dalian cavalrymen, who were paid and rewarded with utmost generosity for joining Imperial army? Why not simply join the Golden Dragon and partake in its opulent hoard of wealth, rather than facing its fiery breath? In Dale, Dorwinion, Gondor and Rohan, a man could only become someone of note thanks to his birth. But the Empire praised its meritocratic rule, and presented examples of common men and women who raced through the ranks not because of family crest, but because of their own skills. People like Sala Vumbar of Kabisa of Clan Arulad, a foreigner and a woman who would never be accepted in other realms, now led entire armies to battle and enjoyed wealth and respect worthy of imperial generals. People like brothers Rudas and Kavatha, who were simple farmers years ago, and now commanded the entire militant arm of the Dragon Cult. And of course, High Priest Karon himself, a man whose word was law in matters of faith, was once naught but a humble stonemason. If you had the skills and courage, the Empire would recognize you no matter who you were. Obedience guarantees citizenship, the agents said in dark corners of Dale and Esgaroth, and many people listened. But those who listened the most were the ones who were left with nothing else, the men of Dorwinion. To surprise of Imperial patrols, a delegation of both human and elven emissaries was spotted marching into Rhunic lands, and was then escorted all the way to the Glittering Hall for an audience with the welcoming Emperor, who greeted them with open arms. He knew what these people were here for. The spies he sent to the plains of Rovanion all brought the same news. The spirit of winemen was broken. The line of wine lords was dead, and with their vale firmly occupied by Easterling forces, with no hope of reinforcements, and, perhaps most importantly, with orcs of Mordor and Mirkwood encroaching from west and south, the remaining leaders of Dorwinion saw no other opportunity to survive but to surrender. There were no demands. They knew they had no more cards to play, and their capitulation was complete. For in the end, it was still better to be a part of the Empire than end up slaughtered by orcs. The Golden Emperor, on his part, was generous. In exchange for filthy and undying obedience, he allowed the winemen to return to their lands, where they would be treated with respect like any other citizen. Lands would be returned to those who would take up arms in the name of the Empire, and the vineyards would enjoy the same privileges they had under the rule of wine lords themselves, as long as they paid their taxes, of course. Rukar then used this opportunity to educate his new subjects. He pointed out that the weakness of the realm was their over-reliance on nobility and names. Dorwinion was not its wine lord, or the wine lord was not Dorwinion. A well-managed realm would simply appoint a new ruler to lead it, instead of losing all hope over death of some lordling who knew nothing about his own lands. It would never happen in the Empire, for its people were loyal not to the man on the throne, but to the rune itself. Every single scale of the Golden Dragon was important to it. Every scale protected it, and worked to make the rest of its body stronger. That was the lesson the old nobility of Dorwinion had to learn quickly, for their restored positions would come with their own dragon cult overseers, who would ensure that their new charges would truly embrace Imperial way of thinking, or face fiery consequences. But while men of Dorwinion enjoyed relatively fair treatment in their defeat, the same could not be said for the elves. The Emperor made it clear, no deal would be made with the Avari, and if any would be seen in Imperial lands, they would be captured and treated as criminals. The elves from the delegation were first to face such fate. Few years back, the men at their side would object and try to defend them, but after constant defeats, their camaraderie was a thing of the past. The entire elven part of the delegation was seized and imprisoned and were never seen again. The rest of the emissaries stared silently at their feet as their former companions were taken away, and Rukar knew they would not dare to oppose him anymore. He had won. One thorn in Rhunic's side was removed, but there were still many more, with the most dangerous one being Khand in the south. For the news of an innumerable Variak host reached the imperial capital, and everyone wondered if Suriut chieftain Jasur would be up to the task to stop them. For in truth, southern borderlands of Rhûn were exposed, and if this self-proclaimed greatest warrior in the world could not defeat the Horde, it could ride all the way to Mistrand, burning and pillaging everything in its path. And while training camps worked tirelessly to prepare new troops, the truth was clear. If Jasur were to fail, then the future of the Golden Empire would certainly be bleak. And the Suriut chieftain certainly had his work cut out for him. As soon as he learned of the approaching Variak host, he sent scouts to estimate their size, for the reports of fleeing orcs were not trustworthy in his eyes. Yet, when the riders returned few days later, they confirmed what orcs shrieked in terror before. The army that was marching on Oibamari was the greatest host any Rhunic soldier ever seen.
Thousands of footmen and horsemen kicked up a cloud of dust so large it signaled their approach days before, and the ground rumbled as thousands of hooves and feet marched in unison, and even man with such thirst for battle as great Jasur understood that facing them in the open field head-on would be nothing but suicide. Some part of him chastised this cautiousness, but while the chieftain was a great warrior indeed, he was but a one man, and he wouldn't send his own men into certain death for no reason. Instead, he prepared to defend the castle he just seized, and immediately get to work to turn the odds in his favor. Variac host was numerous, but that meant it needed tons of supplies and food every day, not just for men, but also for their horses. As such, Jasur sent his men around in all directions to seize whatever material they could find and destroy everything else. Every nomadic camp, every pasture that could be used for grazing horses, every shepherd village were to be torched to the ground so that Khan Arikish's army couldn't find anything to forage. Every bit of food was taken from the locals and stored within the fortress walls just as the great Variac host arrived, and it certainly was a sight to behold. These were not just lightly armed nomads, but veterans of many raids into Gondor, warriors who had both skill and equipment that terrified all Westerns by mere sight. The riders rode ahead and fired a single volley of arrows at the stronghold, and that was enough to blot out the sun. The message was clear. Rhunic invaders would find no mercy here, and this fortress would be their grave. The host then spread out and set up a siege camp, but as days went by, all the work Jasur and his men performed started to take effect. The Variacs had to ride for days to find anything to feed themselves and their steeds, as convoys from home were not enough to sufficiently supply such a mass of men so far away from home. By the end of the week, over half of the besieging army packed up and left. One group travelled back south, no doubt to protect their lands from the Haradrim, while another galloped to the west to raid rich and fertile lands of Mordor around the Sea of Nûrn. The force that was left behind to retake Oibamari was still numerous though, but now, at least, Jasur could see his army winning that fight. He pondered for several days if he shouldn't sally out and break the nomads right away, for, after all, their allies could return at any moment, but these deliberations were cut short by Variacs themselves, who began their assault as soon as their machines of war were ready. Ladders, rams and siege towers rolled towards walls of Oibamari, as Imperial defenders frantically took positions along the fortifications to repel the attack. First flaming arrows sailed through the air, but then the nomads replied with their own bows, and Rhunic archers had to keep their heads down to survive this deadly barrage. Soon, first ladders reached the walls, and Variac footmen made their way up under covering fire from their comrades below. The conscript archers on the wall were no match for them in open battle, but a man climbing a ladder was an easy target when cresting the wall, and even when Variacs managed to gain a small foothold, they were relentlessly attacked by more agile defenders from all sides. The walls were a secondary concern though, for as soon as the gate was broken down, riders of Khand raised a deafening war cry and rushed into the fort. They expected resistance, but what awaited them on the other side were no poorly trained conscripts or levies, but rows of disciplined Lokerim, armed with spears and pikes. First horse that rode through the gate was skewered instantly, followed by dozens of others. The Lokerim, unperturbed by the sight of thousands of horses barreling down upon them, stood their ground and continued to thrust their pikes with relentless, meticulous precision. Within minutes, a pile of dead and dying horses and men lied underneath the gatehouse, but the Variacs were not intimidated as well. Instead, they spurred their horses even harder and had them run atop the morbid pile of bodies and then leap right into the middle of Imperial formation. Most who attempted this brazen maneuver were killed almost instantly, but their plan worked out. Lokerim pike formation was scattered by dozens of horses jumping right into the middle of them, and the rest of the horde seized the opportunity right away. The Variacs screamed their defiance and rode full pelt through the gate, pushing the defenders back. But even now, with the lines collapsed and chaos everywhere, the Locharim stood strong. They were trained to deal with cavalry charges, and from underneath their lizard-like helmets, their eyes glistened not with fear, but determination. Pikes and spears no longer glistened in the sun, covered instead by blood and guts of horses and men. Hundreds of nomads fell, but the rest kept pressing on, pushed forward by the sheer weight of their comrades behind them. The ones at the front swung their blades and lances at the Locharim, while others fired their composite bows at point-blank range or over the formation, deeper into the crowds of the defenders. Men and steeds fell down left and right, and soon the entire battlefield moved a good meter upwards, for so many corpses littered the gateway street. Haradrim spearmen and Dorwinrim glavesmen joined the fight, but despite their efforts, Variax pushed deeper and deeper into the city, until suddenly Rhunnic horn thundered from behind them. The great warlord Jasur has arrived. He was not content to simply sit and watch the battle unfold. As soon as the gates were broken, he took his cavalry out of the castle via back gate, circled around, and now struck the nomadic army from the back. The archers who fired at the walls were taken completely by surprise by arrival of heavily armed cataphracts, and their surprise was cut short by heavy spears and blades cutting them apart. Baroon horse archers rampaged across the back lines, shooting the attacking army in the back, while Jasur and his retainers trampled more and more men. The defenders raised a cheer from the walls. The sight of black and gold-clad cataphracts scattering hundreds of men before them filled them with newfound courage, and they pushed the Variax down from the walls and forced the remnants to flee. In the street behind the gateway, no horse or rider remained alive. The few who survived clambered over the mountains of their own fallen brothers and rode off in terror, and no one in the city had means to chase them over such grisly obstacles. Some footmen tried to attack through the gate again, but the mere sight of the Locharim, covered from head to toe in blood and waiting with their spears among hundreds of dead horses, was enough to break them. They scattered in all directions and were quickly rowed down by Jasur's horsemen. The Empire has prevailed once again. The battle couldn't have been called anything else but a slaughter. In some places under the gate, dead horses and men piled up to 3 meters high, and so much blood flowed down the street that the Locharim stood ankle-deep in red. The pikes and spears paid a heavy price for this defense though, with around half of their numbers dead or wounded, but the casualties on Kandish's side were decidedly worse. Thousands of nomads perished in that street, and it would take weeks to clear up all the bodies from the fortress. But Jasur still triumphed. His plan to split the Variac host worked out, and now he had a far better chance of facing them in the open in a decisive battle. Of course, catching the riders in the open would surely be quite a challenge by itself, but now the odds didn't seem so bleak. And yet, something didn't let Jasur rest. The prisoners he caught were interrogated, and despite their defeat seemed completely unfazed and confident that it was nothing but a small setback. They sang songs of freedom long into the night, and one of them even demanded an audience with Jasur himself.
"We will be free, no matter what you do," the prisoner said. "And we will set you free. We will set this entire world free, Imperial. You think us your foes, but you will all thank us one day."
He refused to elaborate what it meant. Even torture couldn't break him, nor any one of his companions. Khan Arkish has clearly trained his men well, and now Jasur wondered if these men weren't perhaps a distraction from something else, something far, far more dangerous. The news of Jasur's victory couldn't have reached the Empire at a better moment, for on the very same day when the runner rode into town to proclaim defeat of, at least part of, Kandish's great host, a procession of priests and dignitaries has arrived from the west, bringing with them unimaginable treasures. Some months ago, Runic agents have learned about a hoard of dragon gold, once belonging to one of great worms of old, buried near the river Anduin. The land was far away from Rhûn though, and the local Valesmen were not initially eager to part with these treasures, especially since they used some of them as goodwill gifts for dwarves and elves and exchanged the gold for their support, for the Vale faced many, many foes. Orcs crept in from Mirkwood in the east, Gundabad in the north, and Misty Mountains in the west, and in the south, the realm of Lothlorien kept itself isolated from affairs of men and only moved if its own forest was threatened. Thus, though Easterlings were no friends or allies to men of Anduin Vale, they could offer them something no one else could: gold, to help them fight their desperate war. Emperor Rukar sent many gifts to the Vale, the value of which was much, much greater than the remnants of Draconic Horde. It was a good business, the emissaries said. Gold was gold, no matter where it came from, and these treasures had a symbolic value to Rhûn and its people. With foes all around them, the Valesmen begrudgingly accepted the trade, and after another 2 months of travel, the last dragon hoard was brought back to Mistrand and placed in the glittering hall to show wealth, power and opulence of the Emperor. Everything seemed to go well for the Golden Empire. It was high time, then, that it was taught some humility. In the north, the campaign against Erebor entered another phase, as Easterling army under Uldor and Kabisa entered the Iron Hills. Their dual command, however, has once more proved problematic, for upon learning that a settlement of Mirarion was only lightly defended, Kabisa requested an immediate assault. Uldor disagreed. He believed it was better to approach the situation calmly and patiently like always, but alas, most of the men did not listen. Over the past years, Kabisa has seen a meteoric rise, from a commoner woman to war heroine of Clan Arulad, and the soldiers both loved and respected her bravery and ferocity at battle. Compared to her, calm and patient Uldor, leading usually from the back, seemed bland, and when Kabisa demanded the assault, he could do little to convince his soldiers to disobey her. As soon as the first ramshackle battering ram was built, the men rushed towards the walls and battered the gate down, but what they saw inside has completely surprised them. Only a singular dwarf stood in the gateway of the town, goading the Easterlings to attack him. A few warriors approached him and fell as the dwarf carved through all of them with just a few well-practiced swings. Archers and crossbowmen too came, but the defenders simply hid behind the mighty steel shield and laughed at this pitiful attack. Uldor advised patience, but Kabisa couldn't stand such ridicule and ordered her men to attack. The dwarf fled upon seeing the approaching horsemen and was chased into a tunnel that led deep beneath the town. Suddenly, the garrison's plan became obvious. They had no troops to face Easterlings in open battle, so they would force them into a deadly chase in underground tunnels and mines, where dwarves had a natural advantage. What followed were 2 weeks of merciless slaughter. The tunnels proved to be more extensive than anyone could anticipate, and the defenders prepared them well for any incursion. Whenever Imperial soldiers tried to enter, they were met with fortified positions, traps and ambushes at every step. Men got stuck in tunnels that were too narrow and too low for them, but just good enough for dwarves to crawl forward, shoot their crossbows, and then fall back without any risk to themselves. Uldor's men tried to burn the dwarves away, but usually found out too late that the fires they tried to raise only burned them instead of their foes. Entire sections were walled off by corpses of Imperial invaders, and the smell and darkness and constant fear of ambushers were enough to turn even the Locarim into terrified wrecks. Every attack was repelled, every trick was countered, and 2 weeks after Imperial army arrived at Mirarion, Uldor gave an order to retreat. Over 2,000 men stormed the tunnels, the general himself included. Now, 2 weeks later, mere 600 were still alive, and the survivors were in no shape, both physically and mentally, to continue the fight. Men broke into tears at the mere mention of the tunnels, and killed their own officers for ordering them to attack. The assault on this seemingly undefended town turned out to be a disaster. For the first time, Imperial army was humbled, but more than that, it was humiliated. Hundreds of soldiers were left dead in the tunnels, while the dwarven losses didn't even amount to 100. Kabisa raged and promised fiery vengeance upon the dwarves, but in truth, she and Uldor had no means to do so. Their army was broken, and upon hearing the news, the Emperor recalled it back into Imperial Heartlands so it could be rebuilt. Gimilzagar would have to take over with his men. Uldor wanted to join his former retainer, but his father was adamant that he return to the capital. This defeat was not just a stain on Imperial honor, but a valuable lesson, and officers like Uldor and Kabisa now had to sit down with other officers of the army and work out how to not make such a humiliating mistake ever again. Yet, even despite such a devastating defeat, it was nothing but a mere setback. One Imperial army was defeated indeed, but another one was already on the way to take its place. The days of Erebor may have been prolonged, but only time would tell by how much, or how little.
Great victories are like sweet nectar.
Enough! Enough with your arguing. You are both high officers of the Empire, yet you act like spoilt children bickering over toys. Commander Uldor, Commander Kabisa, you have performed your duties with exemplary diligence over the years, and though you have made a mistake at Mirarion, you must not let it destroy your ability to lead. You are not just responsible for yourselves, but for all the men under your command, men whose duty is to serve the Empire, something they cannot do if they are dead. You have failed once, it happens. So stop bickering over whose fault it was and learn from your failure. My son, I understand you are an agreeable man who wants to avoid personal conflict. It is an admirable quality, for pride often blinds people to their own faults, and I am sure that once this war is won, you will be a great governor and statesman. But until that day comes, when you see a fellow officer acting unwisely in a way that puts the entire campaign at risk, you must act to stop it, not worry what your people will think. If common rank and file complaints, simply send your detainers and dragon priests to put offenders on stakes as an example, for it is better to call few rabble-rousers early, rather than risk them dismantling discipline within the entire army. You are Emperor's son, for flame's sake. Act with authority befitting of that title. And Commander Kabisa, the word of your bravery has spread across the realm, and your willingness to fight foes of the Empire at any moment is most commendable. But there is a point when bravery becomes foolhardiness. The men look up to you, and what example do they see? A woman unable to contain her own rage, a woman who is more akin to a wild beast than a soldier of Rhûn. You have been shown much leniency, my lady, but even your fame cannot protect you from your own mistakes. And consider that love of the masses is a fickle thing. They may adore and praise you one day, and turn on you the next one if you fail to live up to their expectations. And I believe no one in the realm, especially you, wants that. So return to your men, rebuild your force, and continue your campaign. You are both well suited to your positions, and your skill complement each other perfectly. So learn how to cooperate, rather than trying to undermine each other at every step. I do not care how you will come to your agreement, but if I hear one report that your bickering caused undue losses in the army, there will be dire consequences. Now be gone, and don't return until Flag of Rhûn waves over the lonely mountain. Now, High Priest Charon, how go your efforts in the west?
Remarkably well, O Emperor. But pardon me for speaking out of turn. Perhaps you have been a bit too harsh on Master Uldor and Mistress Kabisa. They have only made a singular mistake, after all. Their service before has been spotless.
They've been undermining each other for well over a year now, High Priest. It was only luck that caused their disagreements to boil over when there was only a small enemy force facing them. If the dwarves had proper army in Mirarion, I doubt any one of our soldiers would make it back alive. So I'd rather scold them now and ensure this pointless conflict of theirs ends before it can cause more damage, rather than wait and see what will happen. So please, do not bother yourself with their campaign. Give me your report.
Of course. As predicted, the collapse of Dorwinion made our pacification efforts on the plains of Ruvanian and Erebor itself much easier. We see almost no resistance to the new rule, and looking at all the caravans I saw on my way to Mistrand, I'd say our new subjects are assimilating themselves rather well. Judging by all the men noble wine masters sent to serve in our armies, I believe we may be able to bolster our forces significantly.
Arming so many men we just recently subjugated feels like a foolish idea, truth be told. Can we really trust these men?
Not immediately, but once they undergo proper training, I'm sure we'll be able to instill proper discipline and loyalty into them. Some will resist, of course, but my priests have experience in finding out the ones with rebellious thoughts in their minds. More importantly, though, this short-lived alliance between men of Dorwinion and the Avari is now fully over. The Northmen eagerly seize their own elven comrades and deliver them to our men in exchange for rewards or privileges. We don't even have to resort to threats or violence. As predicted, a simple golden coin is enough to convince most of our subjects to point out every single hidden elven camp. Some of the Avari will no doubt escape to the west, either to Lorien or beyond the Misty Mountains, but we shouldn't have any more problems with them here. They're outcasts wherever they will go. From what I heard, even other elves do not have much love for the Avari. But for a good while, your son Abdus and myself will have a fair amount of test subjects to work on. I just wish more dwarves were brought from the north, but I'm sure this temporary setback won't cause too much of a delay in our experiments.
I would hope so. I know your science is not an easy one, but after so many years it would be good to see some results, Master Charon.
And I pray that I soon will be able to deliver. I will admit my initial direction was a mistake. I can indeed make our soldiers fiercer in battle, but the cost is not worth it. There is simply no reason to create a super soldier who could perish even before his first fight. So instead I returned to my original idea, the search for life. We are not getting any younger after all, my Emperor, but now that I have learned how bodies of both elves and dwarves work, I'd say I'm much closer to resolving the issue of time. They both talk like their longevity is some divine benefit, but that's nonsense. Time ruins everything. Even mountains can collapse with enough time. And yet, it seems to barely affect dwarves, and elves not at all. So I opened them. I observed them. I poured various concoctions myself and Abdus designs into them to learn what makes them work. And while I dare not make empty promises, I believe we will make a breakthrough and time will stop being an obstacle for us. Though of course I'll need more subjects for my experiments. So much more. This realm is not theirs anymore after all. The age of golden men is upon us, my Emperor. All we have to do is spill some more blood for it.